So thank you very much for inviting me along. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been involved in agriculture on and off all my life. Started off in farms originally before I went to college. So it's a real pleasure being back in this community. The the work that's going on internationally, and I was at a big international meeting in Denmark. One of the huge challenges is to do with gradual onset issues. So I was delighted to hear about the work with the dusts. So in New Zealand, we kill about 10 times as many people slowly as we do fast. And the loss of quality of life for people is something which every country in the world is struggling with. Interesting to hear that in Denmark, what they do now is actually to connect exposure readings such as dust in areas that you're working. Those connect direct through into your own personal medical records. So if you get to 50 and you're starting to have these sorts of issues, they can track back through all the different employees you've had over your working life. So getting a much clearer picture as to the sort of patterns that sit behind these occupational issues. So, but that really is the number one internationally. That's what the real leading countries are doing. So delighted to hear that you're tackling that in this sector. That's really great to hear. I got involved last year when the enforceable undertaking was negotiated between WorkSafe and the sector. And my background is through various other areas of design. I'm now in the engineering school at AUT, but my PhD was to do with quad bikes. So back about 2001, there'd been a spate of issues here in Australia, and ACC put together a certain amount of money with a couple of other public sector funding bodies, and we did a 2-year piece of research where I went to every part in New Zealand, about 50, 60 farms, about 140 odd incidents, and tried to get onto the site, talk to the people who'd been involved with the incidents. So this was a serious injury and loss of control event study, not fatalities. It's hard to talk to people that come through that experience. So during the course of that, we gained quite a lot of insight. And the real message for me as I finished that study and wrote it up was actually that on the day, all the decisions that these people had made sense to them at the time. So the whole idea of blaming the victim as in, you need to think more carefully, it needs to be more sensible about it. Actually, in a lot of cases, they were actually being sensible about it, but they'd been caught in a goal conflict situation that they needed to get the task done and be back at a certain time. So I gained a lot more interest in all the different factors that went on, and the way that every farm's different, every task is different, every day is different. And from day to day, the individual themselves are also in a different state of mind. Anybody who was watching through at the end of the rugby last night would know that today is going to be a slightly slower day. There's certain things that you don't take on when you're fatigued. You allow yourself to accept the fact that you can feel a cold coming on, it's going to be wetter today. You moderate, you play to the conditions on the day. And so when we got involved later on, so I suppose the last 15 years, most of the small vehicle on farm committees that have been put together by ACC and other such groups, I've been involved in, and it's always been around that question of how do you help the people who think they're making the right decision at the time actually make a better decision at the time, or plan in order that you don't get those goal conflicts on particular days. So a firm 4 o'clock commitment to be back at the yard on a day when actually the weather's possibly not going to allow that, to do that safely. So that's my background. The overall thrust, I suppose, these little cards, which I think Hamish is somewhere folding up. This is really a very short summary of this report that we did, which, am I right in thinking it sits on the website? Yep. So this is sort of 30, 40 pages or so, which talks a lot more detail about what I'm just introducing today. But from my point of view, when you look at all the incidents that have happened to people involving a vehicle, generally there's 3 or 4 different aspects to it going on. You've got environmental factors, so to do with the terrain that you're operating in, and to an extent the kind of task that you're doing. You've got the people involved, you've got the vehicle involved. And on any one of those days, one element in those, so the person unusually fatigued, the environment unusually wet, the vehicle playing up a little bit, or being not quite the right tool for the job. On any one day, one of those things can be enough to turn one of those things that you've done 1,000 times today, it's gone wrong. I mean, we've all driven the car at the supermarket, navigated in and out quite happily, but that's where most of our accidents happen. So just because you've done a thing lots of times before doesn't mean to say that you're not going to have an issue with it on that day. So the question is, why on that day was it an issue? So the idea of the growing resilience was more to do with how can we stack the odds more in our favour? How can we have more protective factors? One of the big shifts that's gone on in health, safety, well-being thinking over the last few years is that when you look at it in detail, actually mostly things go right. Mostly we go out and we're doing lots of things every day, and mostly they do go all right. We've learned how to do them in the right sequence, to give ourselves the right amount of time to get the right tool for it, to keep an eye on people that haven't done it much before. As you would say with riding a horse. When we first looked at quad bikes, people said, well, you can't just say it's a fine, safe quad bike, because what's a fine, safe horse? Well, it depends who you're going to try and put on it, and what you're going to try and do once you've put them on it, and how long you're going to let them go on their own before you check on them. There's all that sort of, the way in which we introduce people to the system is absolutely crucial, and it's no different. It's no different with the vehicle when you think about it. So what we're talking about with the growing resilience idea was not so much how do we together to zero, or zero this or zero that. You don't rule things out, but you can really stack the odds in your favour hugely. You think, to use a sport analogy, you can't rule out the chance of no player getting injured during this game, but you can do a hell of a lot to make it less likely that they will by being fit, prepared, know what they're doing, having the right equipment, being well rested, and the fitter they are, if they do get hurt, the less time it takes to come right. And in the same way, that works with our systems here. So that's the overall thrust of this. If you go to the actual report that's reflected in these, you'll see there's a lot of detail, which I'll talk a little bit about. But ultimately what came out of it was that we had 3 stages. In the first, we just familiarised ourselves, because I'd not worked specifically in kiwi fruit before, and I was working with colleagues from Mackey's, who are specialist consultants in the human factors field in Auckland, who specialise in transport and vehicle systems. So there's some familiarisation with the environments and the specific tasks that people are doing, the tools that are being used, and we talked about the people. Who actually is doing it? How familiar are they? How trained are they? How long are they around for? How much supervision is there for them? The tasks that we looked at were agreed with, obviously it's not comprehensive, but we just wanted to know the major tasks. What are you most commonly going out to do when you're using a vehicle? WorkSafe's interest, because of the fatality in the sector, was to do with a person specifically using a quad bike, should they have been using something else. As you look into the situation, clearly there's a lot more going on. Not just to do with the vehicle, to do with the individual, to do with the presence or absence of anybody else on the site at the time. Is there anyone to ask when you arrive on site? Is there anyone can tell you what's going on that day? Things to look out for, no-go areas, things they may be confused by, those sorts of points. So, I think that's a yep. And these are roughly in the order that people most frequently said that they were going out to do, and that's why we put it. So what are you most likely to use the vehicle for? Getting out and about individually or with somebody, moving larger groups of people for harvest, etc., light construction maintenance work, miscellaneous other tasks involving trailed instruments, spot spraying, crop imaging, dry blow and polling. So we wanted to get a sense as to what are the most hours go into. When you buy a vehicle, what most hours are spent doing it? Because that clearly has a bearing on the features that you're looking for, but also the way in which you, the exposure level that you're working to. So from an environment point of view, we went to a variety of orchards, different conditions, different kinds of tracking, different layouts, different terrain, flat, sloped. And also looked in particular at the different kinds of headland points and other tracks that people find themselves having to navigate during the course of the day. And in looking at the tasks, we also looked at some of the inherent hazards to do with wire and so forth hanging down. So, as I say, there's a lot of detail in the main report, but this is how we gathered it. And then finally, we also looked at all the different types of equipment that people were using, ways that they'd modified them to suit their own property while they're out there. So having done that familiarisation, the main data collection part was a set of focus groups where we invited people in. I say we royally, that was all done by Angus, which was excellent. I have to say, I mean, I've worked in just about every sector in New Zealand, not just primary industries, but pretty much every sector since I came here in 1990 from Europe. And this has been the most cooperative sector as far as bringing people in, and also not just hand-picking in order to make it presenting a certain kind of message. We really did get variety of voices and variety of terrains and so forth. And I was really impressed by the openness of the industry to talk to us about modifications and the thinking behind that, even though they knew that they were potentially putting themselves in a tight spot by doing it. So that was remarkable, and I think it says a lot about your sector. And I'm not just saying it because I'm sitting here and there's a lot of you and only one of me. I genuinely say that I find really, really encouraging. And I think that and taking on things like gradual onset problems is remarkable. So keep that going. The focus groups, what we were really interested in was not what is the best tool. Because if I ask you, well, what's the best car? You get as many answers as there are people, because you use them in different ways. You have aesthetic choices. Some people don't like red. Some people don't like attracting the bees when they're driving around in something that's blue. People have different ideas. So what we needed to get at was, what are they best for? What are they not so good for? So you start to get that discussion going. There is no perfect tool for anything, because it all depends, doesn't it? There's always that, well, it depends. It depends. You're left-handed, you're right-handed, you're doing 1,000, you're doing 1. How much does it cost? Because if it's a lot, then you can't buy something else. So running a business is all about those sorts of compromises and trying to get ones that work. And understanding where you have put yourself in a position where there may be a bit of improvising here. A number of the places that we went to, or people that we spoke to, had bought orchards but weren't working on them. So that is a feature of the primary industries internationally, which is problematic. Because firstly, something can be happening on that day. You can have a bit of washout, you can have a branch down, you can have things going on, a bit of damage that no one's picked up, or there's no one there to tell you about when you arrive to do your work there. If you then have an issue, such as getting pinned under a vehicle, if that happened in downtown Tauranga, you'd be there 10 seconds before someone spotted it, and maybe a minute before you had a vehicle off. I had an injury on a public highway last year, and I was crushed for 30 seconds. So the guys at Mackie still use the video, because I actually had a camera running on a motorcycle at the time, and apparently it's X-rated, the language. But 30 seconds it took for 2 people to stop the car, jump out, and lift the machine off my foot. That, in a field, you imagine that same going on. So I've interviewed people over the years who've been stuck for an hour, 2 hours. In one case, hitting the horn on the vehicle until the battery ran flat, which is a long time, isn't it? She lost all the muscle off her leg, which is one of the most difficult interviews I've ever had to do. A young woman who'd lost all the meat off one calf as a result of that. So that isolation is a big consideration as to how intuitive the system that you're offering to the contractor, or a contractor or a family member who's going to be working in isolation on your property on that day. The system has to be a lot more resilient than it does when there's people around all the time. So we want to know about different ways of doing the tasks as well. people don't all do these the same things. Clearly moving groups of people around the orchards, you're doing the same thing but in different ways. You've got different terrain, different types of vehicle, different options and different populations in some cases as well. So we wanted to know about those. Those are reflected in the larger document that this emerges from. I was actually talking to WorkSafe, Al McCann, who's the head of agriculture for WorkSafe, and we were talking about the official feedback on it. And basically, I would say that pretty much all the concerns that WorkSafe had, the comments that they made about this, are reflected in that deeper report. So if you're interested, have a look at that before you come back to Angus about questions in this, because I think we cover quite a lot of that, but clearly you can't condense a big report down into a little handout that easily otherwise. So different ways of doing the tasks and different approaches to system design. Another issue that we have in the primary industries is that the scale of difference between two businesses, which to an outsider look quite similar, two properties, both with the same kind of acreage, both in the same area. If one's been in the same family for 4 years, 4 generations, mortgage-free, well set up, well connected, a lot of infrastructure done, and next door is people struggling to get in to get their first property, the difference in fundamentally how they can invest and at what point they can make decisions and where they can think more strategically and go, well, we're going to put better tracks in. The cost of that, in one case, is a very sensible move, to the other is prohibitive, and they've got to find other ways of doing this. That kind of subtle differentiation between properties is the sort of thing which I would hope an industry that's got the opportunity to run enforceable undertaking exercises can deal with. Whereas if you've got the regulator just coming in saying, you've got a business, same rules apply, then you drive people out of business. It's just not practical. One of the points with working in small businesses generally, and again, this is an international thing, is that if you've got a small team running a business, any solution to do with health safety has to be practical. It's got to work for the business as a whole. You can't afford to just carry it as this big overhead. It has to keep people at work more, so it's got to make the business more profitable. The whole thing has to add up. It has to make sense. So if you work for yourself, if you don't work, you don't get paid. So it stands to reason that you're going to do what you can to look after yourself and to keep people that you work with. But that can be lost on regulators who are not used to dealing with small business. They're used to dealing with large organisations that have health and safety managers, people with degrees in the thing that they can talk at the same level. They're not used to the dynamics of small business, which is why I think enforceable undertaking approaches are really well suited to organisations that do. So the way that the information is presented in the documents on the website is to look at, by a particular task, what are the different options, different vehicle systems, which to my mind includes walking. If it's a question between a vehicle or walking, in a lot of cases people do choose to walk. They'll buy a vehicle that doesn't fit under the canopy, park it on the headland and walk in with a longer hose, for example. And we have that in all areas of any land-based industries. Walking is generally an option, which interestingly from the regulator point of view, they discount. So discussion documents about walking, they don't include it. So which vehicle are you going to buy? As opposed to stick with the vehicle you've got and buy a longer hose. And I'm not sure why there is that fixation, but it's there. So I suggest that we included it, and sure enough it came up as a comment point with WorkSafe. Why are you including walking? Which is a bit of a strange one. Really importantly is for people reading this, and again this is aimed a little more at the regulator, is to explain a little bit about what's going on with this task. So what are the crucial notes? What are the things about task design that you need to know if you're going to be looking at what kind of plant you're going to use, what sort of mobile plant you're going to use with it. And secondly, we need to know about what are some of the risk multipliers. So, for example, to do with inspection supervision, so this is just an individual person going out. This is how it's sort of generally regarded with inspection tasks. In fact, the more people we talk to about inspection tasks, the more we realise that in this context, you actually do have to have a system that takes two, not one. And this is really common with other areas of agriculture as well. A lot of the inspection, what people describe as inspection tasks, once you actually break it down, actually it is two people going out to have a look. It's being familiarised with terrain by somebody else. So, although they say, no, this is my personal transportation, you ask them to think through how many other people they've taken out this week, and actually every day, in a lot of cases, they are taking somebody else out to show them the job, introduce them to something, ask for an opinion, etc., etc. So, actually, no, you do need something that takes two, if that's how you work. Another risk multiplier is that inspection generally means that your eyes are not following what you're doing. There's a device called an eye tracker, which is basically like a pair of glasses. You can put them on somebody when they're operating a vehicle or walking through a supermarket, so it's used a lot for retail research. You put these glasses on, and you can see where the point of focus is. So you think, you know, the eyes, I can see things from here to here, but actually there's about a 2 degree angle that you're actually focusing on. It's why when you read, your eyes jumping around, because there's only about a word at a time that you can actually focus on. The rest of it, you're scanning. So when we drive along and we're actually looking to see if there's a bit of broken fence, there's a bit of wire down somewhere, there's a hole emerging, there's a bit of washout, if we're looking at that, we're not actually looking at the rest of it. We're just monitoring things that are in the field of vision. And when we monitor, all we're doing is checking to see whether what we expect to be there is actually there. We're not really looking. So, unlike animals, if you go across a piece of land and there are holes, there's washout, there's a bit of a tomo in there, there's something that's fallen off which you can get tipped by, we're not going to see it in a way that an animal would see it. So you've got two pairs of eyes if you've got somebody on a horse. So when people talk about quads as replacing the horse, which the manufacturers do, what they're missing out is that the horse has got a vested interest in not putting its foot in the hole, and it'll step round it, generally speaking. Quad will just go wherever you point it. And they are used as platforms. So when we've done testing, putting the equipment to see where people are looking onto a quad, if they're inspecting, they are inspecting. That's it. They inspect, and they're almost driving by feel. So that's the science of it, and it's quite shocking to watch just how little time they spend doing it. When you do glance back, you glance back at what you expect to see. So if there's something unexpected, you won't glance back for it. That's just the psychology of it. Generally, we look to things. We look for reinforcement. We guess what's there, and then we look to see whether it's actually there, or we check to see whether it's there. We're not looking for things that are unexpected. As I say, all of that detail is sitting in the other report, and so if those of you are interested, feel free to contact me. I think our email contact details are in the report. So absolutely feel free to get in touch if there's anything points you want to make or things that you think we've missed. The final part, which I think is most interesting longer term, and it's certainly from speaking to the guys in Wellington, what they're interested in with the whole enforceable undertaking idea, is the sense of, so how does this improve the sector as a whole? You imagine if you have an incident in an industry, you have a disaster, tragedy in an incident, which would normally lead to prosecution. The idea of just saying, we will leave more money in the sector effectively for you to come to terms with it, understand what's going on, make changes. The test of whether it's worked or not is 5 years down the road. We're going to look at your sector as if we just come in and find a whole bunch of people $50,000 and then stepped away and not really given any more help. Or whether we're going to try and leave that money in there, and then we want to see you working with the people who can help you in order to actually improve what's going on. And I think ultimately it comes down to what happens on individual properties, because all your places are different. There's no one size fits all for all of you. There's certain principles, things to do with when should you test for certain dust. So there's a lot of help that you can give people, but ultimately the final decision, it isn't a one size fits all, which is which is the real danger of having a highly regulated, one-size-fits-all approach, say, from a body like WorkSafe. I had a terrible experience about 20 years ago working down, just after the 1992 Act. We were down in the South Island at a big industrial plant, and they appointed a health and safety manager who just came in. He found the biggest catalogue of safety equipment he could find, which I think was New Zealand Safety at the time. And he basically said, well, if I buy one of these for everybody, that's a problem solved, which was funny, if not a bit tragic, except that they then had somebody hit by a forklift, because this guy who'd come in had insisted that people put hearing protection in a situation where the only thing that was going to stop you getting hit by the forklift was being able to hear the beeper as it reversed. And so the idea that mostly things go right because we've got reversing beepers on forklifts, that is a situation that's involved, and it's the only channel available that's going to let you know you're looking that way, the driver's looking that way. It's an electric, quiet little vehicle in a noisy environment. The only channel that's going to let you know that there's something happening, the only signal you're going to get is auditory. You then put a pair of grade 5s on. Right, that's it. The guy got hit, which was tragic. But the idea that you didn't need to look and see what protective factors you already had and then work with those is something which amazingly has taken about 20 years for the health safety community to actually really properly embrace. 99% of the solutions are already there and already working day to day on the properties. The crucial thing when you make a change is not to improve one thing and make two other things worse, like the hearing. And that is where you need that really in-depth industry knowledge. So with the case studies, my approach to it is that essentially, if you think about three elements of what you do, sorry, it's a little bit faint there, but you can see we've got a blue triangle and then a yellow triangle outside it. What we're looking at here is to do with the environment, the people and the vehicles. There are protective factors. If you think things that you've already done, things you've already worked out, things that have evolved, like reversing beepers on vehicles in noisy environments, there's so much that we've already invented which works. One of the things that comes up a lot is the 40-hour week. I have younger people asking me, where the hell did 40 come from? What's so magical about 40-hour week? And this is a research from 100 years ago in the armaments factory of Europe, saying how hard can we work people who are really motivated, they really want to help the war effort in their country. How hard can we work people before actually we get past the point and it's just diminishing returns after that because they're just getting run down, they're getting fatigued, they're making errors, and armaments factories aren't a good place to make errors. So how do we keep that running week after week, month after month? 40 hours was the answer in that research. And that found its way into laws in every country in the world. But it came out through research. But who the hell knows that? There's a guy called Vernon. His research team did that work in the UK during the First World War. But who knows that? That's a protective factor which had come out of experience, come out of research. And we got lots of those. We got lots of those. So the important thing is to understand what they are so you don't throw them away. Baby out with the bathwater. The way that I see it is that if you can increase the protective factors in all those areas, so your vehicles are more suited to the job, they're more intuitive, they require less training, they work across a wider variety of tasks, they only need one person to attach something rather than two, you can do more from the seat, it doesn't roll away on you if you get out without putting the brake on. All sorts of things which have evolved to make it a better tool for the job. The better the tool for the job, the more intuitive, the less training it needs, the more protective factors you've got, the more you've stacked the odds in your favour. The environment, we can do a lot to make the environment more predictable from a vehicle user point of view, less surprises. Interestingly, in all the years that I've been looking at small vehicles in land use, I've only ever once been to a golf course to look at an incident involving a vehicle. And to me, a lot of that comes down to the fact that it's just about the most predictable environment that you're going to get. The surfaces are suitable for playing a ball off, so they repair all the holes. Any little surprise, they're in there because they're cutting it every day. There's people covering pretty much every inch of it every day for one reason or another. It's an entirely monitored, predictable surface. The vehicles can be lower to the ground. They have like the little John Deere gators. You don't need any clearance because you're not going up and down every hole. There's no surprises. So that's something which, to me, is an investment. It's you're investing in that environment, maintaining and making it predictable. Similarly with the people, what are you doing to build skills? There's talk at the moment from coming out of Treasury about a thing called the Living Standards Framework, whereby public spend over the coming years is going to have to be tied not just to the financial return, but also the way that it builds social capital, human capital, so our skills, knowledge about what we're doing, our ability to transfer skills between sectors, that sort of thing. And it works the same within our teams. Interesting talking to people who have different approaches about their workforce within your sector as to the value of maintaining people with you, the people coming back year after year. You know what it's worth to you. People have different ways of working, but the people who are committed to that are really committed to it. It means you can take the morning off, which is always nice. Leave people in charge who know what they're doing. So the sorts of things we're talking about, protective factors, positive actions, which may or may not be conscious. If you've inherited a situation, you don't necessarily know. You buy a vehicle, you don't know all the analysis and research that's gone into those safety systems. So some of it actually is not totally intuitive. You do actually need to find out, why does it do this? Why does it do that? Why did Dad do it this way on the farm, you know? Why did Mum have this set up like this? It's not necessarily something that we automatically know. We just take it as a given. So, for example, these are some of the things coming out of the cases, just examples. So, protective environments, having the main routes metalled and maintained, more like a golf course if you see, for that point of view. Face-to-face communications through the day as conditions change. If we went back a generation in land-based sectors, people generally had lunch, morning teas, afternoon teas at the same time. Is that right? Is that how you do it around here? Back before the days of cell phones, you needed to know that if somebody wasn't back in by a particular time, you went out and looked for them, because there's either a problem with the job, problem with the vehicle, or a problem with them. So that's how we did it. That's just how we did it. We also have more people on farms. Now we've got less people on the farms, more machinery, and therefore more chance to be out isolated. So it's still a protective factor, and as the conditions change during the day, you have to change operational plans. The fact you actually get to see someone face to face, you can tell where they've been by what state the vehicle's in a lot of the time, can't you? They've been in a no-go area. You can tell by the state of the vehicle when they come in for lunch. So that is a protective factor, more face-to-face communications during the day. Redesigning blind corners, quite a common one. Not many people out there, but you can guarantee the two of you are going to find each other on the tightest corner. So there are things you can do to provide a bit of visibility through that corner just to help yourself. It's a protective factor. And the yellow area, discussions we're having were, okay, so this is what you've already done, a sample of some of the things you've already done to do with people, environment, and your vehicles. What about in the future? What are you looking to do? What ideas have you got? What are you looking into? Things that you can increase the performance factors, make it even more resilient. And a policy on public road use with alternatives reinforced, saying, well, okay, this road is getting busier. The school roll's going up down the street. We've got more and more people driving their kids in. What are we going to do because we've had increasing number of incidents out there? Well, do we actually have to look more at the alternatives? So if it's busy drop-off time in the morning, we shouldn't be using the road at that point. But if we don't use it, what are we going to do instead? Do we need to improve the track that sits the other side of the hedge line or whatever? To do with people, protective factors. Induction training includes site-specific recurrent scenario discussion. Rather grand term, but all we're basically saying is a recurrent scenario is something that actually, no, this does happen quite a lot. We do know that there's this one corner where invariably that's where you're both going to meet each other in a hurry. So, until we do get that corner sorted out, we're going to take you down there and show you. So it's a site-specific introduction to what we know about the most likely areas to have problems on your place. Some people do that, and they just look at me as I'm an idiot when I suggest that anyone does it. Other farms I've been to, where they'll say things like, look, this place costs $4 million. Anyone I'll even charge, if they're not bright enough to work that out, they shouldn't be looking after $4 million worth of investment, which is one way of looking at it. Frankly, it's not how I'd look at it. But, you know, people do run places very differently. They have quite different attitudes towards how much help, frankly, they give people coming to work for them. And that's something that regulators are interested in. Because following 2015, the new Act, participation in risk management and identifying risk is a legal requirement that it's everyone's job. You create the risk, you manage it. And participation within that is being defined increasingly as that proactive, continual improvement, continual discussion of things which are emerging. So just saying, here's the place, I've seen your CV, where you go, I'll be back in 3 days. That is not an approach which is going to be received in the same way as it was 15 years ago because of these new definitions that we've got. Another reason I mentioned walking in those sheets is because a number of places I've been to where I say, what happens if the person breaks a rule? You know, we say no, you know, you've got to go second gear down this particular bit because it's blind or whatever. And you see someone and they're absolutely hooning it along. What happens? And they say, well, they're walking. It's what we do. You're going to have to get up an hour earlier tomorrow because tomorrow you're walking because, you know, that's how we do things on the farm. You know, we do it with family members, and now we do it with people coming to work here as well. Well, clearly the task is doable walking then, isn't it? It is also an option in those cases. Another thing to do with people, communications upgrade linked to the vehicle systems. A lot of vehicles getting more and more technically able to incorporate communications systems which allow that rolling communication between people working on a place to get rid of that isolation. Also automated systems so that we know where people are, whether the vehicle's moving, whether it's on all four wheels or not. These sorts of things which can improve the speed with which we can get to somebody who's had an incident. And finally with the vehicles. I say finally the vehicles because I do think it's not so much about, you know, this whole question is I'm buying a new one, what do I get? Because there's all these other things that sit around it where if you have an incident happen on the farm, it's not, you know, the vehicle is one element in this much bigger picture of what was going on the day. But clearly it's important. I think a crucial bit of why it's important is that as a sector you have a lot more power than you realise. You go in as an individual to buy a vehicle, and particularly if you've only ever dealt with one particular guy because you married his sister and you know, don't really have a choice about where you buy your vehicle or whatever it might be. This is, as a sector, the information coming out about what you want does have a bearing on what comes in. And particularly if as a sector you're talking to the people that control what can come into New Zealand, and we have this in other parts of New Zealand's industry quite a lot. What can happen is that the specifications that come here are more likely to suit what we need here. So for example, with Honda, with the quads, there was a discussion that went on at one point where all the Hondas had moved to running boards, which for the vast majority of New Zealand actually works better because you don't get wire popping up from the front tyres, wrapping around your ankle, dragging your leg under the back wheel, these sorts of things. So having a solid running board, whilst it makes it wider for dabbing to support yourself, you're also far less likely to get lower limb injury, less debris coming out, particularly wire and paddocks wrapping itself around your boot. That was a completely arbitrary call from a Honda point of view. They got a bin full of this sort of one and a bin full of that sort of one. As a sector, you can say to Honda, look, if it's coming into New Zealand, it comes with a solid running board, maximum width, this, etc., etc. That is doable. at an industry body level. It's not doable at a one farm at a time level. And I think that's where you can really make some difference. And so finally, monitoring the market for upgrades that are better head protection while still fitting under the canopy. To me, that's a huge question, in that some people don't want a vehicle that goes under the canopy or have decided they're not going to try to do that. Other people say this is the only way to run the place, this is how we do it. And to me, as a sector, if you're talking to someone like John Deere and saying, look, there's a lot of us buy these things, you take us, you take golf courses, you take a whole load of other users, and then look at other countries that are doing it too. How big a market is there to just come up with a design where between the suspension, chassis height, ride height, and protection, we have something that could actually work underneath in the way that we would like it to. To me, that's exactly the sort of thing that the forums are well placed to do that individuals aren't. And that's me. Thank you very much.